I mean, he's on the phone. Wouldn't you think that you would have seen Nolan on the bottom on the floor or something? Or scrambling around, or everybody in a small space on the boat looking at him or something. I mean,
Before we examine theories, accusations, or online interpretations, start with the question at the center of the controversy. What should the people on that boat have seen? That question sounds simple, but in the Nolan Wells case, almost nothing about the final hours of July 4th remains simple once the available footage, statements, and timeline are placed beside one another. 6 weeks after Nolan Wells disappeared from a 4th of July outing off the Mississippi coast, the most important question still had no publicly released definitive answer. How did he die? Nolan was 18 years old. He was from Ocean Springs and had recently graduated from Ocean Springs High School. He played wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. On July 4th, he traveled by boat with friends to Horn Island, roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi coast. The plan was ordinary: spend the holiday with friends, enjoy the island, watch the fireworks, eventually come home. Instead, Nolan disappeared. His body was recovered 2 days later, on July 6th, and what happened between those two moments remains the subject of an investigation, competing accounts, independent analysis, and increasingly intense public scrutiny. But there is an important distinction we have to make immediately. There are things the record establishes. There are things witnesses have said. There are things attorneys have argued. And then there are interpretations made by people examining photographs and video online. Those categories cannot simply be blended together. Because a blurry figure in a photograph is not automatically a person. A movement in a video is not automatically evidence of an assault, and an unanswered question is not automatically proof that somebody committed a crime. That standard matters here more than ever.
What an absolute wild thing to say when so many people have seen this video and slowed it down and noticed that there's either like a hand or a foot or something that comes flying up when they tug on the toe right there. Like, I can't believe that they said that. But please, please, please put out this interview. Please give me something to tear apart. Y'all, I swear I see Warren stop breathing when he starts this sentence, and he doesn't move again until he closes it out.
Before we go any deeper, if you value true crime stories that separate verified evidence from speculation, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We follow the evidence, examine the timeline, and bring you updates as new information becomes available. Now, let's go back to the footage that started so many questions. One online researcher reached a very different conclusion after slowing and examining the footage. Listen first to the interpretation, before we compare it with what can actually be established. That is an interpretation of the footage, not a finding by law enforcement or a court. And that distinction becomes critical when we start examining individual people in those images. The footage has become one of the most debated pieces of publicly discussed material surrounding the case. Viewers have slowed it down. They have brightened dark portions. They have compared clothing. They have examined hairstyles, bracelets, tattoos, hats, body shapes, and even the apparent position of people on different boats. Some viewers believe those comparisons reveal inconsistencies. Others argue that the footage is simply too poor to support identification. Both positions deserve to be considered. Because image enhancement can make an object easier to see, it does not necessarily make the identity of that object certain. That is one of the biggest traps in visual investigation. When an image is dark or blurry, the human brain naturally attempts to complete the missing information. We see patterns, we recognize familiar shapes, and once someone suggests what a blurry figure might be, subsequent viewers can begin seeing the same thing. That phenomenon is not proof. It is one reason professional forensic analysis distinguishes enhancement from authentication. Increasing exposure can reveal detail that was already present. It cannot create certainty about who was standing there. And that brings us to one of the most controversial portions of the footage.
I mean, he's on the phone. Wouldn't you think that you would have seen Nolan on the bottom of on the floor or something, or scrambling around, or everybody in a pot, like in a small space on the boat looking at him or something.
Here is the original exchange that became a major focus of online analysis. The statement raises a legitimate question about visibility, but it does not by itself establish what happened to Nolan. To answer that, investigators would need to know exactly who was where, when the footage was recorded, and what was happening outside the camera's field of view. That last point is easy to overlook. A camera only records what is inside its frame. A photograph may capture one side of a boat while leaving another completely outside the image. A short video clip may show people moving without revealing what happened immediately before or after it. And a social media photograph can have an even greater limitation. We may not know its exact timestamp unless the original metadata or another reliable source confirms it. That is why the timeline matters. Not the timeline someone believes happened, the timeline supported by records. According to the material discussed publicly, Nolan was on Horn Island with a large group of young people on July 4th. There were multiple boats. There were different groups moving between the island and boats. There were photographs and videos taken throughout the day. And there were later questions about which individuals were aboard which vessels and at what times. One of the central issues involves the Triton and the identities of people visible around it. Online researchers have attempted to identify individuals by comparing clothing and accessories in separate photographs. One example involves a person appearing to wear distinctive bracelets. Another involves a person believed to have a particular hairstyle. Another involves an individual wearing red shorts. The reasoning is understandable, but the conclusion must remain cautious. A bracelet can be distinctive. A haircut can be distinctive. A body type can appear similar. None of those characteristics, standing alone, establishes identity beyond reasonable dispute.
Run of the information. We can now definitively say that this is Jax. We can also now definitively say that this is Morgan. He's wearing the same hat as well as the same bracelets. So where were they on the Triton? Now that we've got a much clearer video thanks to Officer Tatum, it's obvious that there is nobody in an orange swimsuit or a paisley swimsuit on this boat. We also barely see that there's somebody here in the red shorts. Now in this Katie Snapchat picture, I've been saying that there was somebody in the background here wearing red shorts. So I pumped up the exposure, and as you can see, it certainly looks like it. They seemingly have similar body types as well as similar hairlines. We also know that whoever was in the red shorts was also on the shoreline when the fight broke out. Now who was involved in that fight? Warren's brother, Carter. Carter, who trains in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And by Warren's own admission, his brother put someone in an arm bar. And in case you don't know what that looks like, go ahead and look at that placement on the back of the head there. Spot look familiar? Given Carter's height, build, body type, this looks like it could be him. But one blurry, underexposed picture is not solid proof of anything, right? But we know Warren grabbed his younger brother and had him come over hang out with them on their boat as they were sinking or whatever. And it would be pretty bad for their case if this was Carter on the Triton and then on Katie's boat at 6 o'clock. But now my attention turns to this person who a lot of people think is Bart. But in his hand, he is holding a cell phone. So I thought, why would Bart jump from his boat to the other boat holding a cell phone when other people have cell phones in their hands while Wyatt is on the phone in the picture? So while I was trying to compare pictures of Bart to the person on the boat that I can't identify, I found this picture with him with a tattoo from about 2 years ago. And it wasn't until just today that I stopped looking at the tattoo and I started looking at his wrist. Because someone in the background of this picture has always stuck out to me because my instinct always was like, is that Bart? Bart seemingly has a pretty pronounced mullet as according to this picture. But this was definitely not on Bart's boat. I checked the seating and the covers, like it's not Bart's boat. Now I think you pretty much get where I'm going with this because then I remembered this bracelet. Pretty unique bracelet. Unique like the bracelet that Bart Jr. was wearing in that tattoo picture. And right here looks like it might be the tail end of a tattoo that wraps around the forearm, right in the same place that it would be on Bart. I've said for a while now that the story about them calling Bart that morning to go out on the boat never made sense, because what 21-year-old didn't already have plans for 4th of July? So then the question is, who was driving Bart's boat? Which brings me back to this guy who some people have thought looked like Bart. However, we do know that he was on Bart's boat handing out drinks to people in that 7-second clip we've seen. Same hair, same glasses, same hat. By the way, did y'all know that Bart has a younger brother? The family resemblance is very striking. I mean, the real difference is that he's a little bit shorter and has a squarer jaw. And does anybody want to guess what his younger brother's name is? Brooks. Now, I seem to remember, and I can't remember exactly the context, a certain somebody talking in an interview about his buddy Brooks. Here's your reminder to check out my bio.
The next portion shows how online researchers are attempting to reconstruct the boats using visual clues. Watch the methodology carefully, but remember that these are proposed identifications, not official findings. The analysis produces several questions, particularly about who may have been on which boat, but questions become useful only when they can be tested against independent evidence. One of the most important questions is therefore not simply, who does this person look like? It is, what evidence can independently confirm where that person actually was? That could include original photographs, phone location data, boat GPS records, security camera footage, messages, witness statements, or other contemporaneous records. This is where the case becomes much more complicated than a collection of screenshots, because multiple sources may tell different parts of the story. A photograph may tell us who appears to be present. A phone record may tell us where a device was. A GPS system may tell us where a boat traveled. A witness may tell us what they remember seeing. None of those sources is automatically infallible. But when independent sources converge, confidence increases. And when they conflict, investigators have to determine why. Another issue concerns Carter, described in the source material as Warren's younger brother. According to public discussion of the incident, Carter was reportedly involved in a confrontation on the shoreline and was described as having Brazilian jiu-jitsu experience. That has led online commentators to compare his physical appearance with a person visible in photographs. Again, the distinction is critical. A physical resemblance is not evidence that the person in the photograph was Carter, and even if an individual were positively identified, that identification alone would not establish that the person participated in any wrongdoing. The significance would depend entirely on the time, location, circumstances, and other evidence surrounding that appearance. That is the difference between investigation and accusation.
Now I want to talk about Warren's 17-year-old brother, Carter. Carter, who we know got into a fight with someone and put someone in an armbar on the shore. Carter, who Warren said he told to come over and hang out with all of them and chill out. Carter, who practices Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Notice the hand placement. And if you're like me, I had to go look up and see what an armbar exactly is and how it is done. And oh, look at the placement of that arm. Yeah. Now this seems to me like it definitely could be Carter. Picture was just taken in December, so the haircut, the hairline, the body type, all of it. We also know that the person in the red shorts were on the shore when the fight happened. Now y'all remember this picture, the Katie Snapchat pictures? Well, I brightened it up. All I did was just pump up the exposure, nothing else, and look in the background here. Oh, red shorts, just like I said. Lighter colored hair with a very familiar looking back of the neck. Now, of course, I'm not saying whether this is or isn't Carter. Boy, this wouldn't look good for anybody if this is Carter on Katie's boat at 6:02. But you know, one underexposed, blurry picture a smoking gun does not make.
Here is the specific comparison that has circulated online. Listen carefully to the researcher's own qualification about what the image can and cannot prove. That qualification is important. The image may generate a lead, but a lead is not a conclusion. If you're following this case closely, make sure you're subscribed. This investigation is still developing, and some of the most important answers may come from evidence that has not yet been fully examined publicly. Subscribe so you don't miss the next update as we continue following the timeline. The same principle applies to another unidentified person who has been discussed extensively online. Some viewers believe the person resembles Bart. Others have suggested the individual could be Bart's younger brother, Brooks. The argument is based partly on hairstyle, facial structure, bracelets, clothing, and other visual characteristics. But once again, the available footage must be treated according to its limitations. If the image cannot clearly establish identity, the responsible position is not to choose the most interesting possibility, it is to leave the identity unresolved. That may feel unsatisfying, but unresolved evidence is still evidence. And sometimes the most important conclusion an investigator can reach is that the available material does not justify certainty.
Unless somebody with a very unique haircut and a very distinct piece of jewelry happens to show up in one of these pictures. Because Mullet Boy here has always bothered me because for some reason he's wearing what looks like jeans. Not saying they are jeans, just can't definitively prove one way or the other whether they are or not, or if it's just the design of the swim trunks. When I went back through some of the photos I had collected of Bart Jr. to try and figure out if this was him or not, I found this picture I had archived. Thanks to the tattoo in this picture, which is the reason I screen grabbed it, that's why I'm like, I don't think this is Bart, because I feel like I would see the tattoo there, but and mind you, this picture is a couple of years old, but I just kind of wanted a timeline for this tattoo for identification purposes. And then I stopped getting distracted by the tattoo on his arm, and I looked at the bracelet on his wrist. Pretty unique set of bracelets, right? I mean, hopefully by now you've figured out where I'm going with this. Why, what a unique set of bracelets! So between the mullet and these bracelets, someone may come to the conclusion that Katie and Bart were on a boat together. Maybe not Bart's boat, because after all, they're claiming that this boat belonged to a Marty McGrath, who's the one who came and got people. But if that's Bart here, then who was driving Bart's boat? Did you guys know that Bart has a younger brother? Very similar looking, but I'll tell you what, very different jawlines. Almost like the jawline of this person on the Triton. And guess what his brother's name is? Brooks. Now, where have I heard that before? Hasn't somebody talked about my buddy Brooks in previous interviews? I always said the whole "we called Bart that morning" story didn't make fucking sense. I have a theory that I'm flushing out. But thanks for doing this interview, guys. Wouldn't have been able to figure this out without...
The next section illustrates how several separate visual observations are being combined into a larger theory about the boats. That theory may warrant investigation, but until independent records confirm those identities and movements, it remains a theory. And this is where another major element enters the story: the statements made publicly by the attorneys representing people connected to the boat. The attorneys have repeatedly maintained that their clients are innocent. That is their role. A defense attorney does not have to prove a client's innocence in a press interview, and a public denial is not evidence of guilt or innocence. The relevant question is whether the underlying claims can be tested. One attorney repeatedly emphasized three names: Morgan, Jax, and Warren. He said they left the island at approximately 4:30 p.m. He also warned people against making accusations that he characterized as false. That produced another wave of online speculation about why those three names were emphasized. But there is a more cautious interpretation. An attorney may deliberately limit statements to the clients directly represented in a particular context. The omission of another person does not necessarily imply anything about that person's involvement. To conclude otherwise would require evidence that is not contained in the statement itself.
About Morgan, Jax, and Warren, I'm not going to call them untruths or half-truths or falsehoods. I'm going to call it what it is: lies. Morgan, Warren, and Jax left the island at about 4:30 p.m. That's it.
Yeah, did anybody else pick up on him constantly repeating Morgan, Jax, and Warren? Morgan, Jax, and Warren are innocent. Morgan, Jax, and Warren left at 4:30. That language is intentional. He's intentionally excluding all the other people on the boat, all the other people that went to the beach. And you might notice he conveniently left out the brother in all of this. Aren't you also representing his brother? And yet you intentionally say stuff like this.
Morgan, if you lied about Jax, if you lied about Warren, we're going to get you. And you're going to be hauled into court. You're going to be held accountable. And it's going to be very painful. And what I would say to the people who have done that is, now's your chance. If you want to apologize and retract before you find yourself in court, you should probably do that now. Because if you don't do that, once you're in court, now you just can't leave. You won't be able to get out of it. And we're not going to name names because there's some other folks who are doing that, and we want to be better than that. And I want to emphasize this, right? We're not here to guess. We're not here to speculate. We're only going to deal in facts, right? And here's the most important thing.
Now listen to the attorney's own words. This is important because it shows exactly what he publicly asserted, rather than relying on anyone else's interpretation of his position. The statement is clear about the attorney's position, but it does not answer the larger investigative questions about the entire group, the boats, or Nolan's final known movements. That distinction matters because public relations and criminal investigation operate differently. An attorney can argue that a client is innocent. An investigator has to establish what happened. Those are different functions. The public statements also included discussion of the Coast Guard. One account emphasized that a call was made that night. That fact is significant, but the timing matters. According to the timeline presented in the source material, the call was made around 11 p.m. rather than immediately after Nolan was first noticed missing. The fact that someone eventually contacted the Coast Guard does not, by itself, establish why there was a delay. It also does not establish what the people involved believed had happened at that moment. Those questions require evidence. What did they know? When did they know it? Who did they speak with? What information did they provide? And what did they believe Nolan's whereabouts were? Those are much more useful questions than simply asking whether a call happened.
People who have been sucking up way more oxygen than they're entitled to have not been to the island. I'm willing to bet that a lot of the hustlers and profiteers and liars have not been to that island. And you have to go to that island. And being at the island today was revelatory. It was really illuminating. It's a very dynamic marine environment, first of all. But when you go to the island, you see instantly that what some people want to be true, what they wish to be true, they're trying to wish it to be true. They're trying to make it true through their lies. It's actually not possible. It is a very, very long and narrow barrier island. It's basically very low sand dunes. And the particular part of the island that we're dealing with, there are no trees. It's hardly any foliage, hardly any tree cover, hardly any plants, and it's wide open. And on July 4th, there were thousands of people there. There is no possible way that anybody could have committed a murder in broad daylight.
Here is the relevant portion of the interview concerning the Coast Guard. Listen to the claim first, then consider what the timeline does and does not establish. Calling the Coast Guard is a documented action. What remains important is reconstructing the circumstances surrounding that call. There is another issue that has received substantial attention: the island itself. An attorney representing people connected to the case argued that the physical environment made daylight homicide implausible because the island was crowded and exposed. That argument is worth hearing, but it also needs to be characterized correctly. The physical openness of an island can affect the plausibility of certain scenarios. It cannot independently establish what happened. A crowded location does not make every crime impossible. And the absence of publicly known witnesses to an event does not prove that the event did not occur. The useful question is whether anyone actually witnessed an incident involving Nolan, whether video captured it, and whether investigators found physical or digital evidence supporting one account over another.
And we're not going to name names because there's some other folks who are doing that, and we want to be better than that. And I want to emphasize this, right? We're not here to guess. We're not here to speculate. We're only going to deal in facts, right? And here's the most important thing, right? We don't know how Nolan Wells died. No one here is saying we know. But what we do know is Morgan, Jax, and Warren had nothing whatsoever to do with Nolan Wells.
The attorney's argument rests heavily on geography. Here is the claim in his own words: geography can narrow possibilities, but it cannot substitute for forensic evidence or a complete timeline. And then there is the question of what happened after the group left the island. That is where the boat timeline becomes especially important. According to the publicly discussed chronology, the group left during the late afternoon. There were questions surrounding mechanical problems, a boat taking on water, and a later tow involving sea tow. There were also questions about who was aboard which vessel and when. These details matter because even a small difference in timing can change the meaning of an entire sequence. If a boat left at one time, but a phone or photograph places someone somewhere else at another time, investigators have to reconcile those records. That does not necessarily mean someone lied. People misremember. Phones can remain in one place while their owners move. Photographs can be uploaded later. GPS records can have technical limitations. But contradictions are exactly what a serious investigation is supposed to examine. There is another piece of evidence that deserves particular attention: security camera footage. The source material repeatedly raises the question of whether footage from the residence where members of the group returned could establish when they arrived and who came back with them. If such footage exists, its evidentiary value could be substantial. Unlike a blurry social media photograph, a continuous security recording could potentially establish a sequence of arrival, people present, vehicles or boats involved, and the approximate time. But there is a crucial limitation. The public does not currently have the complete footage. That means nobody outside investigators can responsibly claim what it proves. We can ask why it has not been publicly released. We can ask whether investigators reviewed it. We can ask whether it corroborates witness accounts. But we cannot describe its contents as fact unless those contents have been independently established. But let me ask what I am allowed to ask. Why did the phrase "no foul play" leave a sheriff's office before a medical examiner had finished the work? Not after, before. Who decided that sentence was ready to say out loud, and what did they have in front of them when they said it? And if there was no foul play, why did that same office then go to the public and ask for unedited video of altercations on that island? Answer that one. I will wait, because you cannot hold both of those in the same hand. 2 medical examiners have now examined this young man. One the state paid for, one his mother paid for, out of her own pocket because she did not believe the state would tell her. 2 examinations, and the word that comes back is undetermined. So I want to know what undetermined means in Jackson County, Mississippi in the year 2026. Does it mean the science ran out? Or does it mean somebody looked at what the science was pointing at and decided that word was safer? The state's report has been finished since the end of July. It sits in a drawer. The district attorney says every death in that county goes to a grand jury, that this is procedure, that this is how it has always been done. Fine. Then answer this. Whose comfort does that procedure protect? The attorney makes 2 claims here that should be separated: uncertainty about Nolan's cause of death and certainty about his client's innocence. The first point reflects an acknowledged gap in the public record. The second is a legal position that should ultimately be tested against evidence rather than rhetoric. That brings us to perhaps the most important unresolved issue: the medical evidence. The source material describes 2 autopsies. One was conducted by the state. Another was independently commissioned by Nolan's family. The family's examination was reportedly classified as undetermined, pending further investigation. The state examination was reportedly completed toward the end of July, but its findings had not been publicly released at the time described in this material. That creates a difficult situation. People outside the investigation want answers. The family wants answers. The public wants answers. But a medical examiner's conclusion cannot responsibly be reconstructed from rumors about what the report might contain. Undetermined does not automatically mean homicide. It does not automatically mean drowning. It does not automatically mean foul play. It means the available medical information, at least as publicly described, did not establish a definitive manner of death at that stage. The distinction is essential. Ask yourself why an 18-year-old did not have his phone. Ask what a phone knows. Ask who has looked at what it knows and when and what they found. Ask why the last person publicly described as being with him is still, 6 weeks later, a person the public has never heard from. Ask why the loudest voices in this case have been attorneys, not investigators, not the medical examiner, attorneys. Ask who benefits when the conversation moves from a boy's body to a lawsuit over what strangers said on the internet. And ask the biggest one. If Nolan Wells had been white, and the group he went out with had been black, would this file still be sealed today? Would the words, "no foul play," have arrived that fast? Would anybody be telling that mother to be patient? I am not going to answer that for you. I will not tell you what happened on Horn Island on the 4th of July, because I do not know, and neither does anybody who has told you otherwise from behind a screen. Here is what I know. The grand jury has not spoken. The report has not been released. The phone has not been explained. The mother has not been answered. This case is not closed. It is not solved. It is open, and it stays open on this channel until somebody with a seal on their letterhead tells that woman how her son died. Until then, the only honest thing any of us can say is that we do not know yet. Now we reach the point where public statements and medical findings intersect. These questions have not been answered publicly in full. The central issue is not whether an online commentator believes one theory. It is whether the official evidence supports any definitive conclusion at all. There is a particularly important chronology surrounding the sheriff's office. Early public statements reportedly indicated that no foul play had been identified. Later, the same investigation sought original, unedited photographs and videos from the island, including material that could show altercations. Those two actions are not necessarily contradictory. An investigation can begin without identified foul play and still seek evidence that could either confirm or eliminate that possibility. That is what investigations are supposed to do. The danger comes when an early statement is treated as a final conclusion. No foul play identified is not the same sentence as foul play did not occur. The first describes the state of knowledge at a particular moment. The second is a conclusion. Those are very different things. The investigation has also reportedly involved a substantial number of interviews. The figure discussed publicly is approximately 60 witnesses. The FBI has reportedly been involved in examining digital evidence. If accurate, those facts tell us something important. The case has generated a much larger investigative footprint than the earliest public statements might have suggested. But again, we should not overinterpret that. Federal involvement does not prove a federal theory of the case. A large number of interviews does not prove investigators suspect homicide. Digital forensics does not automatically reveal a hidden crime. It means investigators are attempting to reconstruct events using available evidence. And one digital device may be particularly important: Nolan's phone. The phone matters because phones can create timelines: calls, messages, location information, application activity, photographs, connections to cellular networks. Depending on what investigators legally obtained and what data remained available, a phone can sometimes establish where a device was and when it was active. But there is another limitation. A phone's location is not necessarily the same thing as its owner's location. A person can leave a phone behind. Another person can possess it. Location systems can vary in accuracy, so even digital evidence requires context. Still, if Nolan's phone was separated from him during the critical period, that fact could become highly significant. Who had it? When? Why? And what does its digital history show? Those are questions that cannot be answered by examining a photograph alone. I will not tell you what happened on Horn Island on the 4th of July, because I do not know, and neither does anybody who has told you otherwise from behind a screen. Here is what I know. The grand jury has not spoken. The report has not been released. The phone has not been explained. The mother has not been answered. This case is not closed. It is not solved. It is open, and it stays open on this channel until somebody with a seal on their letterhead tells that woman how her son died. Until then, the only honest thing any of us can say is that we do not know yet. After separating the confirmed facts from the interpretations, the remaining questions become much narrower and much more important. And that is where the public record currently leaves us. There are things we can say with confidence. Nolan Wells was 18. He went to Horn Island with friends on July 4th. He did not return home. His body was recovered on July 6. His death has generated an investigation involving witness interviews and digital evidence. There have been competing interpretations of photographs and videos. There have been public statements from attorneys representing individuals connected to the case, and the full medical findings have not been publicly available in the material we are examining. Those are facts. Then there are the disputed questions. Exactly where was Nolan during his final known hours? Who was aboard each boat at each stage of the afternoon? What happened during the reported mechanical problems? What happened after the group separated? What happened to Nolan's phone? What does the security footage show? What do the original digital files reveal? And what did the medical examinations actually conclude? Those questions are far more important than whether a blurry figure resembles one person or another. Because if investigators can establish the timeline independently, many of the visual theories will either become stronger or collapse. A person identified by a bracelet must still be placed at a specific location. A boat identified in a photograph must still be connected to GPS or witness evidence. A statement must still be tested against records. And every alleged contradiction must be checked against the original source. That is how speculation becomes investigation, or how speculation gets eliminated. There is also an uncomfortable reality surrounding public attention. When an investigation remains unresolved, people begin filling the gaps. Some do it because they genuinely want answers. Some because they distrust official institutions. Some because they believe they have discovered something investigators missed. And some simply because unresolved cases create an audience. But Nolan's family is left with something much more serious than an online debate. They have lost a son, and the public discussion cannot change that. It can, however, create pressure for transparency. That pressure is most useful when it is directed toward verifiable questions rather than unsupported accusations. Ask for the timeline. Ask what evidence was collected. Ask whether the phone was examined. Ask what the autopsies concluded. Ask which footage investigators possess. Ask what has been independently verified. And ask what remains unknown. Those questions do not require us to decide who is guilty. They require us to insist that the evidence be examined. There is one more issue that deserves careful treatment. Some public commentary has raised questions about race and whether the investigation would have unfolded differently under different circumstances. Those concerns cannot simply be dismissed because they are uncomfortable, but neither should a racial explanation be presented as established fact without evidence. The appropriate question is whether there is documented evidence of unequal treatment, investigative failure, or differential standards. If such evidence exists, it should be examined. If it does not, speculation should not replace proof. The same standard must apply to everyone involved, to the family, to the investigators, to the witnesses, to the attorneys, and to the people who have become subjects of online speculation. The most responsible position today is therefore neither nothing happened nor we know exactly what happened. It is this: we do not yet have a complete publicly verified account of Nolan Wells' final hours. The investigation must continue. The evidence must be preserved. Original files should be examined rather than repeatedly reposted versions. Digital records should be authenticated. Witness accounts should be compared against objective records. Medical findings should be evaluated by qualified experts. And theories should remain theories until evidence moves them into a different category. That may not satisfy everyone, but it is the only position consistent with the evidence standard this case requires. The final question is not who the internet believes. It is what the evidence can actually prove. Until those answers emerge, Nolan's story remains an open investigation, not a finished theory. A case like this creates a powerful temptation. We want the missing pieces to fit. We want the blurry photograph to become a clear identification. We want the timeline to produce an obvious explanation. We want the medical evidence to settle the question. And when those answers do not arrive quickly, speculation rushes in to fill the space. But Nolan Wells deserves something better than certainty manufactured from incomplete evidence. His family deserves answers supported by records. And the public deserves to know what investigators can prove, what they cannot prove, and why. So here is where the case stands based on the material examined here. Nolan went to Horn Island on July 4th. He did not come home. His body was recovered 2 days later. The circumstances surrounding his death remain disputed in the public record. 2 medical examinations have been discussed, but the complete official findings have not been publicly available in the material reviewed here. Investigators have reportedly interviewed numerous witnesses and examined digital evidence. There are photographs and videos that have generated competing interpretations. There are questions about the boats, questions about timing, questions about the phone, questions about the movements of different people, and questions about what investigators knew at different stages of the investigation. But none of those unanswered questions, individually or collectively, gives us permission to declare someone responsible without evidence. That is the line this channel will continue to respect. If you want to follow this case as it develops, subscribe now. We're not here to turn unanswered questions into accusations. We're here to examine the evidence, track verified developments, and revisit the timeline when new information changes what we know. If the next piece of evidence changes the story, you'll want to be here when it does. If new verified records emerge, they can change our understanding of the timeline. If forensic findings clarify the manner of death, they can eliminate theories. If digital evidence establishes where people were, it can resolve disputed accounts. And if the official record contradicts something presented online, then the responsible thing to do is follow the evidence, not defend the theory. Because the goal is not to win an argument. The goal is to understand what happened to Nolan Wells. And until the evidence provides that answer, the honest conclusion is simple. There are still questions. There are still records that matter. And there is still a family waiting for answers. If you want future updates on this case, subscribe and stay with us. Not for rumors or sensational claims, but for carefully examined developments as verified information becomes available. Because in an unresolved case, the next piece of evidence can change everything.